Hey, welcome back, everyone. In this episode, I've got Ron Lichty joining me. Ron teaches companies about the Agile workflow, and basically, in a nutshell, he helps teams, software development teams, be more productive. Ron's joining us here. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time to join us and talk to us about Agile, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. So a little bit about me. I'm an interim VP of engineering, interim fractional VP of engineering. So I've been consulting for the last 8 years after having started my tech career as a programmer. Spent 8 years doing that. I've got several patents on embedded microcontroller systems. I wrote compiler code generators. I wrote early word processing software and word processing tools. I wrote some entertainment software and some multimedia software. I got hired into Apple in my first management role, ended up managing the UX of the Macintosh Finder. The development team that writes the Macintosh Finder. Stayed at Apple for 7 years, moved on for my first director of engineering role in an entertainment company. It was in entertainment companies for 3 years. Then went to Charles Schwab in financial services, still as a director of engineering, but there got promoted to a VP of engineering. Led engineering teams in both small and large organizations, the last one being at Stanford University, which had rolled out a business to publish nonprofits, academic journals online. Mouthful. I did that for a couple of years and then left there 9 years ago to consult. To do what I had been doing actually as a manager all that time was making software development hum, to untangling the knots and transforming chaos to clarity. And 3 years before that, I had begun training teams in Agile because it really does help software development hum. And I've continued to do that. And I also coach engineering leaders.
That's really awesome.
I should add, so I'll hold up. This is my fifth book, Managing the Unmanageable, Rules, Tools, and Insights for Managing Software People and Teams. And this came out about 8 years, about when I began consulting, actually. It is one of the very few books on managing software people and teams. There's a ton of books on project management. There's a ton of books on Agile. There's almost nothing on managing the people who deliver the projects. And so that was what my co-author and I set out to do, was to share some of the hard-earned wisdom so that new managers didn't have to go through that.
Well, it sounds like you've got decades of experience going into that book. I'll plug it now. RonLichty.com is going to have information about that book, along with a bunch of other resources, as well as information about Ron's background. And of course, I'll have that in the description below for everyone to check out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Agile is and why it's important?
So in the beginning, computers, came along in the 1940s during World War II. Electronic computers. There were ones mechanical computers before that and people computers before that, but electronic ones came along during World War II. You had to enter information one bit at a time. And so, pretty much one programmer, one computer, even though the computer takes up a whole room. By the 1950s, we had teams working on software development, and those teams struggled because they were going in all different directions. And they thought, well, we need to figure out how to work together. And initially they came up with something called waterfall. So you may run across waterfall. Waterfall has this characteristic where first we figure out all the stuff we want to build. And then once we got all those, then we can design it. We can do our architecture and figure out how we're going to build it. And then we'll turn it over to the developers, and the developers will do all the development. And then we'll turn it over to QA, to testing, to test our work and find out whether we were successful from a quality standpoint. And only then does the customer get to see it. And over the course of the next 3 decades, that was pretty widely used, but also pretty widely recognized that it didn't work very well. So it seems like it would work really well. And it's used in civil engineering. It's used to build roads. It's used to build bridges. But software development is so malleable, and our customers have such a hard time knowing what it is that they want, that what we want to do is we want to develop a little bit of that project and show it to them, find out whether we're on the right track or not, and then continue and show it to them and find out whether we're still on the right track or not, and then build a little bit more and show it to them. So I ran into Agile for the first time in 1999 when I was at Charles Schwab in the form of something called Extreme Programming. And we brought the creator of Extreme Programming down to Schwab to do some workshops for us to help us be better at it. It has a lot of common sense in it, but there's not a lot that's common about common sense. And so it was really helpful getting somebody who knew what he was doing. And I was very intrigued. It encompassed a bunch of best practices around software development that I'd seen, and it pulled them together and said, wow, this makes a lot of sense. But when I became really enthusiastic about Agile was 3 years later when a colleague said, we're doing something called Scrum. And I hadn't heard of Scrum before. And so I said, so what is it? And he said, well, the first thing is that our developers go heads down for 2 weeks at a time and don't get interrupted. I thought, whoa, this has never happened to me in software development. The developers don't get interrupted for 2 weeks. How does that work? And he said, well, our product managers are constantly being bombarded by changes in the landscape, by changes in the competitive universe. Our competitors bring out products. Our customers ask for new things. They're constantly being bombarded by that. But what we do is say, hey, every 2 weeks, we'll take in a new set of work. And we'll take in that set of work and we'll figure out how much work we can get done in the 2 weeks. We'll say, okay, so we're going to commit to this part of the project, this part of the product. And we'll get that part of the product done and we'll work from a backlog, and the backlog's ordered by what's going to give the most value to our customers and what's going to give us the most feedback of whether we're on track or not. And so we're going to develop from that standpoint. We're going to develop for 2 weeks. We'll give it to our product managers and they can show it to customers. But in the meantime, they've been getting input and they can redirect our attention just by having a new backlog for us to pull work from. That the top of the backlog is the most important stuff, the stuff that delivers the most value to customers and the stuff that's going to help us know whether we're on track or not. And I thought, wow, that's sort of the yin and yang of software development. It's both developers are most effective when they can go heads down and be focused and not be interrupted, and product managers are constantly being bombarded by the world and need to be able to change. We need to be agile. And so we need both focus and to be able to respond to change. I found it just marvelous and began leading teams with Agile and then began training teams in Agile about 12 years ago.
It's incredible. So the shift basically went from the plan it all ahead of time to more of a, it's okay if things change, that's expected. Let's facilitate, what our developers need to get things done in these shorter, what are called sprints. But then if something needs to change, that's okay. We work with feedback between the customer, the project manager, the developers. And it's a kind of a fluid thing that's happening there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's wonderful. How do you think that could be interpreted or used by a freelancer, someone who's working maybe by themselves or maybe just with one or two other people and the customer?
So these days, you're going to find that every organization you talk to says they're doing Agile.
Of course, yeah.
Now, there's better Agile and there's not so good Agile. And companies I get called into typically are not doing not so good Agile, and it gets called a lot of things. Scrum butt was one of the first I heard, and it what it means is, well, we do Scrum, but we don't do this part of Scrum, or we do Scrum, but we don't do stand-ups every morning. One of my rules of thumb around software development that has become really dear to me because it is so true is that software development is a team sport. And team sports are gated by communication and collaboration. They're gated by psychological safety. They're gated by our ability to work together really effectively. And if team sports are gated by those things, it sort of makes sense that we talk to each other at least once a day, plus the daily stand-up. The daily stand-up is intended to be 15 minutes or less. If it's taking longer than that, we're talking about Scrum butt. And so I hear, oh yeah, we do stand-ups in Slack. It's like, no. The stand-up is not intended to be a status meeting, and all Slack can do is give you a status meeting. What we're really doing is getting together to find out how we're doing on our sprint plan. This 2-week plan that we put together, are we going to be able to deliver it at the end of the 2 weeks? And all kinds of things come up in the meantime. For example, production can go down. When production goes down for a company, when our systems are down and our customers can't reach us, guess what? Everybody stops doing what they're doing. Everybody stops working on the plan, and it's all hands on deck to get production back up again. And other things can be interruptive as well. So we walk into our code base and we discover that there's a ton of technical debt in that area of the code base and it doesn't work. We start developing an algorithm and we discover that our notion of the algorithm that was going to work for solving this problem doesn't in fact solve the problem. We've got to come up with a different algorithm, and it's going to take us longer. And so, can somebody else fill in for us? Can somebody have my back because I've run into some kind of roadblock that it's going to take me longer on the stuff I committed to So I can't deliver on everything I committed to. Can somebody else have my back and fill in for me? Or is there something we need to take out of the sprint because none of us can fill in for each other? And we need to ensure that we're delivering the highest value stuff for our customers and the stuff that will give us the most feedback.
In relation to like a solo freelancer or maybe someone that's working and they've contracted out a little bit of the work to someone else, but a very small team, let's say, and the client, I think what I'm taking away from what you said is that communication is just absolutely crucial. And so a lot of times with developers or designers, the client tells them to do something and they go off and they do it, but maybe instead of doing it for 2 weeks, they do it for 2 months, and then they come back and the developer has it, or the client has a kind of a different idea of what they wanted. And the person doing the work is kind of crushed. They're upset, right? Like, I thought I was doing what you wanted, but had they been meeting in those proper increments and changing in an agile way, saying, oh, okay, I appreciate your feedback, let's go ahead and change this to better fit your needs, then the product makes the customer happy, which is the overall goal, right? Happy
Yeah, yeah.
customer, good product, everyone's happy.
Our goal is delighting customers. When you've been developing software, as long as I have, but you could do a fraction of what I have, and you're going to run across a customer that says, "Yeah, I know that's what I asked for, but that's not actually what I want." And
Yeah.
and the only way, and it's one of the hard things about software, is that customers actually can't describe what they want, and it's not just software. I mean, Henry Ford is said to have said, I don't know if he did or not, but he's said to have said that if he'd asked his customers for what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Steve Jobs would not have developed the Macintosh if he'd asked customers what they wanted, because what they would have said was probably a faster MS-DOS, a faster IBM PC-DOS. What we need to do is listen to their problems, translate that into what we believe will satisfy and delight them, and then show it to them as early as possible to find out whether we're on track or not, to find out whether, in fact, we understood their problem set and understood the solution that would best deliver that problem set. The solution.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would assume that on a bigger team where you actually have a product manager and a scrum master and all these different roles, it's a little bit easier for people to take on the role of trying to interpret solution to these problems that they're getting from the customer, because that's not always necessarily the developer's job, right? They're going to run into issues along the way that they can get feedback on, but there's sometimes someone in the middle that says, okay, this is what they're asking for, this is the issue, and then during the planning and maybe even during the scrum, you're able to figure out a solution to that problem that maybe the customer wasn't aware of.
Yeah, that's right. And so our Scrum team ideally has a Scrum Master who's basically facilitating and coaching and helping us to be effective. And it's got a product owner whose goal is to understand our customers better than anyone else does and translate what our customers want. So sometimes we think, oh, well, the founder of the company probably knows what customers want more than anyone else. And that's pretty much true. But founders often don't have product management skills in order to translate what customers want into software and going from problems to solutions. And similarly, product managers often don't have the development skill sets that we as developers have in order to bring solution sets and solution possibilities and solution options to the puzzle. So what we really want is founders to talk to customers, product managers to talk to customers together to figure out what the problem set is, product managers to translate it into, here's the problem we're trying to solve in software, and product managers and developers together to come up with solutions that are going to solve that. And so we get this really rich set of possibilities. And going back to, again, my mantra of software development as a team sport.
Exactly. That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people get into software development thinking that there's just that one role. You just get in front of the computer and you code. So that's what you need to learn. But what they may discover, and maybe even through this interview, is that that's not the only thing out there in these technology roles. If you are interested in programming, but you don't necessarily want to sit in front of a computer and type code all day, there's other roles. You can be a scrum master, a project manager. There's all kinds of opportunity in that space that doesn't necessarily just have you writing out lines of code.
Yeah, and for those of you who are going to just write, who say, I just want to write lines of code, I want you to broaden your thinking a little bit Because, when I train teams in Agile, when I come in as an interim VP of engineering and work with teams, one of the things that I try to get everyone to recognize is that everybody on my teams needs to be a leader. The intern needs to be a leader. You're learning some things right now that the team that's been working together for maybe a couple of years probably doesn't know, because you're working at the edge of newness, at the edge of technology. You need to be able to step up with what you know. Now, we're not expecting the intern to do the architecture, and we're not expecting the intern to be the product manager. We're not expecting the product manager to be the architect, and we're not expecting the architect to be the product manager. We want people to step up with the skill sets and in the roles that they play, and bring themselves and all of that knowledge and wisdom and understanding from where they are. Come from where you are, but be a leader. So if you think about what we're really looking for in a Scrum team, is I use the analogy of, if we were in music, what kind of music would we be playing? It would probably be jazz, because in jazz, every single member of a jazz group, a free jazz group, steps up and solos. And they don't solo with no one else playing at the same time. Everyone else is playing in harmony or something with the person who's soloing. And the soloing passes transparently from one person to another. The person who's soloing may not know when their solo is going to end. Think of it in terms of acting, where we're an improv group. Think of it in terms of basketball, where the Golden State Warriors or the Chicago Bulls, when Phil Jackson coached the Chicago Bulls, or the LA Lakers when Phil Jackson coached the LA Lakers. A team that doesn't look to the bench to figure out what to do next. They look to each other, and they're constantly responding to what each other are doing on the floor. And everybody's a leader, and only one's a leader at a time. And that leadership passes back and forth transparently.
Early on, as I was learning programming, I think I was learning like Ruby on Rails or something back then. But back in San Francisco, I experienced a situation where I had to work on a project with a small team of 2 other students. And in hindsight, it's very apparent to me that there's a lot more at play than just being a good developer. You got to be a people person. You got to be a team player. And at the time, I was not. I thought I was right. I thought that my way was the right way. And I definitely kind of alienated the other members of my team. And I think the overall project probably didn't turn out nearly as good as it could have if I had taken their feedback, and acted in such a way that facilitated a more harmonious working together and producing an end result that everybody was delighted with, because we were essentially the customer and the development team at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of shot myself in the foot, but I appreciate the fact that I can actually take that as a lesson.
One of the aspects of Scrum is that we retrospect every 2 weeks and ask, how did development go for the last 2 weeks? And what one thing could we try? We'll do an experiment for the next 2 weeks and just try changing something and seeing if it's better. Try changing, not to be stubborn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in this modern world where everything is kind of dictated by data and analyzing that data and making changes based on that, it's nice to have that human element come into play and have a system like Agile where you can say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we improve on? Let's try something different and see how it performs, and then come back and talk about it again and make any changes as necessary.
Yeah, it's a wonderful process. I've been thrilled by it since meeting it 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, there's a whole lot within Agile. You showed the book a moment ago. It looked like it had quite a few pages in it. I know there's lots of resources on your website, ronlichty.com. Again, I'll put that in the description. 2 things. One is, of course, do you have anything you feel is missing that you'd want to say? And then 2, in this changing landscape where everyone's working from home, but developers especially are becoming more remote, not a lot of people are going to the office anymore. How is that affecting something like Agile? Can you still have an effective Scrum meeting over webcam like this? How is that changing the landscape?
Yeah, the good news is that webcams like this exist now, and we can do that. One of the characteristics, and you have to dig into research to discover this, and then when you start thinking about it, you realize how true it is. So communication's not just the words. And one of the things we get when we're in person, so Ian, you and I can look at each other and we can see our facial expressions, but I can't see your body language. You can see some of mine and you can tell I'm leaning forward right now, but you can't see the rest of my body language. And when we're in person, we get a ton of information from each other's body language. It's much more limited when we're in this way. At the same time, there are some advantages, but the advantages, we have to remember that software development is a team sport. The communication and collaboration are core to team sports, and that we really need to be intentional about ensuring that the communication and the collaboration happens. We may need to write more stuff down. So there are teams that have been remote for years and years and years that have cultures of writing things down. They make sure that if you and I have a meeting without the rest of our team, Ian, that we write down what the result, what the conversation was, and what came up, and what the, as well as what the conclusions were, so that everyone else can go consult with that. We have to bring transparency to all of our communication and collaboration.
Yep, that you make a good point. Although this is new for a lot of people, there are many teams out there that have been doing this for quite some time and taking advantage of the technologies available to do the remote teams and everything. Very helpful. A lot is very insightful. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with?
I said up front that our goal is delighting customers, but I think our secondary goal is finding joy in what it is we do, because what got me into software development, the absolute joy of solving hard problems in code, seeing that code come to life and deliver then, and then seeing customers being delighted by it. And that combination, I think, is really powerful.
That's an awesome note to end on. Very profound. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ian.